Welcome to Glass in the Session. I'm your host, Val. Thank you for joining me. I so appreciate your patience during my brief hiatus. I still have a way to go, but I feel like I can drop some nice short episodes of tasty treats for you in the meantime, and therefore, it's only right we kick off the season with bubbly. In this case, I have what's called a Txakolina. That is spelled with a Txakolina. I was introduced to this wine in a city called San Sebastian in northern Spain, right on the coast of the Bay of Biscay. It was a cold, rainy April evening, which was pretty much every night while we were in Spain for that 2 weeks. And we were skulking from wine bar to wine bar in search of tapas, which they call pinchos in Basque Country. And Basque Country, or Euskadi, about which I could do an entire episode, by the way, this is where we're going to begin. So what's in a name? The name Txakolina has several origin stories, but it's often credited toward being Basque or Euskera in origin, and Euskera would be the language. So Euskadi is Basque Country, Euskera would be the Basque language. And again, that is all. Wow, that would be a great episode for a whole other day. But back to the Txakolina, because one clue in the IN in Txakolina, that's been found in other words to translate to liquids in Euskadi. But there are also theories that the meaning of Chacoli means vino di caserio. This is wine made in the village. So think of wine for the house or country house wine. This is all derived from the Basque word for made in the house or at home. And I'm not going to attempt any more Basque words because trust me, you don't want that. According to the Spanish wine website, however, Chacoli was indeed homemade and produced in farmhouses until not too far back. But there was also another theory on Chacoli's lexical provenance. And when I say Chacoli this time, I'm talking about the Chacoli. According to a 2014 piece by Grupo David Sebastian, the 10th edition of the Dictionary of Castilian Language of the Spanish Academy of 1852 locates and defines the spelling of Chacoli as wine, and I quote, which is made in Vizcaya and in the mountains of Burgos. Finally, on the provenance of the word, it's the CH spelling of Chacoli that is said to come from the Arabic word for thinness, which is chacalet, and I'm not positive on that pronunciation. I could not find it anywhere as far as being able to find the proper way to say that word in Arabic. There are other authorized names and spellings with various combinations that start with TX and CH and there's C's and K's and vowels all thrown in there. But as you can imagine, it depends on the time period, depends on the language you're using, whether it's French, that's right. There are French spellings, Spanish derivations, Basque spellings, etc. But however you spell it, Chacoli wine itself dates back to at least the 9th century in the Ayala Valley under the reign of King Ordoño I. Chacoli can also trace its roots, pun intended, to the time of King Sancho I of Navarra in 1180. And this history, what's interesting, I took little bits and pieces out of the production standards because the different Chacoli wine regions, which we'll get to in a minute, they each cite respective milestones for their area. So as far back as 1399, we find ordinances set up around Bilbao for the licensing of wine production. In 1509, in San Sebastian, the Brotherhood of the Podavines, or vine pruners, was created from about 400 men. And there are also documented what are believed to be the first trading of Chacoli in the 16th century. And the word Chacolin, Chacolin, is mentioned by the Royal Chancellery of Valladolid. William Bowles, a mining engineer, talks about Chacoli of Alava and its vines in his 1775 Introduction to Natural History and Physical Geography of Spain for 2 whole pages. As for other writings about the wines of Chacoli, it's noted Carl Wilhelm von Humboldt passed through the Basque areas in 1801, and he wrote that, and this is a quote, "The wine tasted during his pilgrimage of San Vicente Martyr de Abando was actually compared to the wines of the Rhine and Moselle valleys." In the 19th century, along with powdery mildew, and through the early 20th century, the onset of industrialization, cattle ranching, and changes in consumer preferences, all these things pretty much wiped out viticulture in this area of Spain, this area of northern Spain. But the stubborn nature and the desire to protect what was once just a regional coiffer, it has since manifested itself into achieving DO status in the 1980s. Another fact that plagued Chacoli and its image was the negative associations with primitive winemaking techniques and the equipment, not to mention the unfavorable climate. However, since the 1980s, producers have made great strides to modernize their facilities. They've updated their machinery, and they've been working toward increasing the quality of grapes and making better wines. And of course, a lot of vines were replanted. So by reducing that time between picking the grapes and getting them to the pressing facilities and identifying the grapes that really work well for this area, the Regulatory Council holds strong that they are preserving and displaying the true characteristics of unique quality grapes. And we'll get to the grapes in a minute. So where is Chacoli made? The particular area of Basque Spain that is home to Chacoli is in what is known as Green Spain. The weather we experienced that April, that rainy, cool weather in the spring, that's pretty much standard fare for the region. Summers are cool. The rainfall is almost about 60 inches a year. It's very heavily influenced by the Atlantic Ocean, and it does border the Bay of Biscay. So you're probably wondering why they even bother trying to grow grapes there. As with many things in the wine world, the proud tradition, just plain stubbornness, or some combination thereof is what drives these makers to keep producing this wine. And within Basque Spain, there are 3 official regions or DOs that serve as the main appellations for Chacoli. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of those. Guitarriaco Txakolina, which is Txakolina Guitarria in Spain, Vizcaico Txakolina, or Vizcaya in Spanish, and Arabaco Txakolina, or Chacoli de Alava in Spanish. Guitarriaco Txakolina is the largest and the first of the Chacoli DOs, and it's been a DO since 1989 and lies west of the city of San Sebastian. It has around 433 hectares of vines, and 90% of them are planted on the coast. And this is according to the Guitarria Chacoli board website. It is very humid here, so the vines are trained up high, and optimally they lie on 15 to 20 degree slopes. That way they can benefit from sun exposure as well as protection from the wind. And this also keeps them from getting mildewed by training them up high. And of those vines planted, many of them are the indigenous white grape, get ready for this, Andarabi Zuri. And Zuri, Z-U-R-I, is Euskara for white. This is the grape that many of us encounter when we first discover Chacoli, whether it's in a restaurant or on a menu somewhere. There is also a red, Andarabi Belza, and Belza in Euskadi means black. It's mostly used for local red and rosé wines, but an interesting thing about the Andarabi Belza is that it is only grown in the Chacoli appellations, nowhere else in Spain. It is believed to be a possible relative of Cabernet Franc and is quite possibly a parent. One thing is sure, this is not a white version or color mutation of the Andarabi Zuri. There are other authorized varieties such as Petit Corbu, Gros Mansang, Chardonnay, and Riesling. I'm not going to give you the Euskadi words for all those because that's better seen on paper than listened to on a podcast. Trust me on this one. Also, the accessory grapes I just mentioned, they're not allowed to exceed 20% of vineyard acreage. So if a producer wants to put a varietal name on the bottle, there is the 85% rule, which is for most of the EU now that I think about it, and minimum 85% of that variety has to be in the bottle to use that name of the grape on the bottle. In the glass, Chacoli is actually pretty dry. It does have less than 9 grams of sugar per liter, which some would say is brute, and it must be at least 9.5% ABV. Again, we're talking about the Guitarria appellation. They have different styles, and this is something new to me. I have a Rosado right in front of me. I'd never had one before. I've only had the white. So my mind was blown when I found out they not only have white, Rosado, and red, they have barrel fermented Chacoli. And it's normally going to be a little bit fizzy. So for the white or the Blanco Chacoli, it's going to be pale yellow, green to gold. The aromas and flavors going to be a little bit on your herbaceous side. Remember, this is a cool, rainy part of Spain. So you're going to have herbaceous aromas. You're going to have citrus and green fruits. You're going to have a moderate finish in fizz. And on the Rosado or the rosé styles, you have to have at least 50% of the red grapes. In the glass, the rosé, mine is a kind of a pale crystal pink, but they can go pretty dark, almost to fuchsia in color. And then on the nose, it's still going to have some of that herbaceous character. Remember, cool region, but it's going to accompany the citrus and green notes and get a little bit of the tart red fruit as well. And it is still fizzy, but there was a screw cap on this bottle, which is fascinating. The red Chacoli, it's also going to be fizzy, a little bit more berry in flavor, which is characteristic of the grape with the red and black fruit notes. Barrel fermented Chacoli, which I have yet to see. It's going to be more golden in color, as you can imagine. It's going to have increased aromatics that come from the winemaking process, so the secondary aromas, and it's going to have a more complex palate, and it's going to have a little wood influence. Remember, barrel fermented is going to bring some of that texture as well. The second region is the Bizkaico Txakolina, and this literally means Chacoli from Biscay, or Chacoli de Vizcaya, or Chacoli de Bizcaya, depending on the language you're using. But this DO was established in 1994 and is mainly located around Bilbao. And that's actually where you find the Guggenheim Museum if you've ever gone there. Again, it was a totally rainy day when we were there, but it's a fascinating place to visit. There are about 85 towns that grow about 500 acres of grapes in this DO. The region is more mountainous, and it also has two river valleys cutting through it, the Butron and Ibaizabal. As for the grapes, we are back to the Andarabi Zuri, trained on the high paras that I mentioned earlier, those trellis systems that keep the grapes up above the risk zone, if you will, for mildew in a humid zone. But it's also got the Andarabi Beltza I mentioned earlier, and another black grape called Andaribia. And there's a cool red variety that was almost extinct, but again, history and pride are shepherding its comeback. This grape is called Oyer Begi, which means eye of the chicken. Accessory grapes, again, can only occupy 20% of vineyard surface, and these include the Fol Blanche, the Petit Corbu, the Gros Mansang, Petit Mansang, Sauv Blanc, Riesling, and Chardonnay. And these production standards for Chacoli Bizcaya, the bottlers, the vineyard producers, they're all registered and numbered, and there are no bulk wines shipped from this area if it is to bear the name Txakolina. This short lease, it addresses some of the concerns regarding the reputation of all Chacoli producers that could be risked by shipping in bulk or bottling outside their strict, predetermined, and registered facilities. Furthermore, there is no alternative packaging option currently authorized, and it must be bottled in glass. In the glass, we can expect a slightly more elevated alcohol by volume for the Bizcaya. The minimum is 10% for white, rosado, and red, and if the white is fermented in the cask, the minimum ABV is 11%. They are all going to be dry wines. Maximum residual sugar here is 5 grams per liter. So we're down there at the brut level, almost the extra brut level. For the Blanco, we can expect a little more complexity with white flowers, tropical notes added to the citrus and herbal aromas. This also accounts for the more than 95% of Chacoli production, according to the Consejo Regulador website for Bizkayo Txakolina. They've also specified more strawberry, raspberry, and green pepper characteristics on the nose and palate in the specification for the Rosado style. At least 50%, again, of the grapes have to be red by law. The red Bizkayo Txakolina also specifies more vegetable garden green pepper as well as the orchard fruit, and the color can actually approach an intense red and even shades of violet. As for the barrel fermented white, the Chacoli de Bizcaya is expected to be complex, moderately intense with aromas of white and citrus fruit, and even balsam to accompany the herbal taste and the long finish. Last but not least, we get to Arabaco Txakolina. This is the newest of the Chacoli DOs, only awarded 20 years ago in 2001. It's called Chacoli de Alava by the Spanish, and it is the smallest of the Chacoli DOs. Most of its vines lie mainly in the Ayala Valley and even further west of the other Chacolis. To the south, of course, there's some of the Rioja wine-producing regions that lie in Basque Country. As for the grapes, we're back here at the very famous now Andarabi Zuri, Andarabi Beltza, and pretty much the same accessory grapes here, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling Chard, Gros Mansang, Petit Mansang, Fol Blanche, and Petit Corbu. And these, again, can comprise only 20% of the vineyard. And the styles, again, include the white, rosé, red, all with a minimum ABV of 9.5, and the barrel fermented with an 11% ABV. None of the wines can exceed 15% ABV, and all three styles defined by slight presence of carbonic acid, which we take to mean fizzy, except for the barrel fermented, which when translated is to present a slight itching at the tip of the tongue. Yummy. Organoleptic characteristics are described as follows. For the white, we're going to have more emphasis on tree fruits and green apple in addition to tropical citrus. That to me sounds like a little bit more ripe grape. Less dominant floral notes. Herbaceous notes are also a mainstay, along with some bitter in the finish. The pink or rosado is definitely going to be paler toward the pink and salmon hues, but also adding in some cherry and wild berry fruits to the descriptors. With the red Chacoli, we're going to have a predominant green pepper and wild berry characteristic. And then, of course, these are going to accompany an intense violet cherry red color, along with floral and herbaceous aromas. And the barrel fermented style is going to show more emphasis on wood notes from the barrel, accent the fruity and citrusy character again of the grapes and the bitterness in the finish. This wine is kept extremely cold after a long fermentation in what is usually stainless steel tanks. It's also bottled at nearly freezing temps to preserve that natural CO2. And here they do restrict the barrel size for the barrel fermented Chacoli to 350 liters. Also, the rosé still has to have a minimum 50% red grape. Furthermore, the single varietal wines listed are subject to that 85% rule I've mentioned earlier. Now that you know where it comes from, what grapes are in it, and where the grapes grow and where the wine is made, we want to get to the drinking because that's certainly the most fun. So I'm going to take a sip right now. Usually, you drink it out of a regular old glass, not necessarily a wine glass. Although it is not produced under pressure like sparkling wines, the natural carbonation is maintained by pouring from a height. Remember, I said my bottle came with a screw cap. I did not lift the bottle 3 feet above the glass to give it some fizz. This is called breaking the Chacoli. Less experienced pourers, I would be one of them, would use a small plastic insert called an escanciador, and this would aim the stream into the glass. No, I didn't do that either, but some producers are now aging their wines on the lees, and they do ask you to use a regular wine glass if you're going to serve those kinds of wines. Traditionally, you're going to find this in the tapas or the pinchos bars in Basque Spain, where there are lots of seafood, lots of small plates, and the prolific use of toothpicks, which is sometimes how you settle your bill, by the number of toothpicks. I've only seen it done by the number of small plates stacked up in front of you. And then they do this thing where they throw the napkins on the floor. You can imagine I have such a hard time doing that, but you move on to the next bar and you start all over again. I also found some really cool Chacoli notes that go beyond the 3DO production regions that I mentioned, because Chacoli is produced in other regions of Spain. That said, in November 2010, it became illegal to use the name Chacoli outside of Basque Country, but there were lawsuits and there are still fights to this day. Litigation between Cantabria, Castile y Leon, Basque Country, and their winemakers about the TX versus CH, the Chacoli name, the applications to wine marketing traditions and origins, and the EU finally determined, however, that one spells Chacoli with a CH, then the term isn't so much a geographical indication, but a characteristic of traditional wine. According to a 2011 article in Infocant, Eastern Cantabria and Northern Burgos and corresponding governments, they jumped to defend their right to qualify their wines as Chacoli with either a CH or a TX. To corroborate their arguments, Cantabrian cultural associations came to wield municipal documents of the 18th century that already spoke of their Chacoli with the CH. So, Cantabrian Chacoli, CH, has been produced for over 800 years with the same grapes. The appellation of Costa di Cantabria, a Vino della Tierra, they allowed some limited Chacoli production, and they also used Albarino, Gewürztraminer, and Trecciadura in their Chacoli. The north of the province of Burgos in Castile y Leon is also a Chacoli producing area. In Miranda de Ebro, the production of Chacoli was very common until the second half of the 20th century. There's even a street in its Bordari neighborhood named after it. In 2011, Miranda de Ebro sold about 20,000 bottles of Chacoli, but was not allowed to put it on the label at the time. However, I've linked up some articles in the show notes that have video from recent years describing the ongoing struggle for PDO status for the other Spanish Chacoli wines. As of now, the way I understand it, if it's from the 3 Basque regions I mentioned earlier, it's going to be spelled with a TX. If it's from the other regions of Spain, it's spelled with a CH. And speaking of CH, I'll bet you didn't see this coming. Chile. There is an homage to the beverage in Chile. While it's a different wine altogether than that which is produced in Basque Country, it does have the same name, and a wine called Chacoli has been produced for hundreds of years here in Chile as well, with records dating back to the 1800s. The wine comes from the Copiapó Valley and the Choapa Valley. According to a research paper called Typical Wines of Chile, The Rise and Decline of Chacoli, 1810 to 2015 by Lacoste, Castro, Quiroz et al., Chile's Chacoli amounted to nearly 1/3 of their production by the end of the 19th century. The grapes, of course, very different. We're talking mostly Muscat and Pais. And I wasn't kidding when I said homage. Since 1975, the Fiesta del Chacoli is held in the city of Dañihue in the Cachapoal Valley. And a festival seems like just the right place to raise a glass. First, I want to raise a glass to you for joining me for a very fresh season of Glass in Session. I'm so grateful for the kind words, the notes you sent while I was in voice therapy. As always, I feel so privileged to have earned a spot in your podcast feed every 2 weeks. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime, however, between sessions. You can find me on Twitter at WineGalUnboxed, email me at val@glassinsession.com. On the Facebook, Pinterest, and Insta Spaces, I'm Vino With Val. Glass in Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is by Addict Sound. Website, glassinsession.com/podcast.